Hi, everybody. Welcome to Paul Programs, your spot for learning just a little bit more about game mechanics and game design. Today, we're going on a quest. Not just any quest, a mechanics quest. About quest mechanics. So, let's get this show started. So, if you find yourselves interested in learning more about game design, game mechanics, and the sort, let me know in the comments section below what kind of topics interest you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be alerted when new videos drop talking about some new and interesting game mechanics that you may not have known how they work before. So, now let's dive into our main topic, questing. So, what are quests? Quests are basically tasks or missions given to players to accomplish in game. Some may be tied to main game flow, some may be just kind of like a side thing that doesn't impact the main flow of your game. But quests are basically things for you to do. And there's all sorts of different types of quests. A good example is a fetch quest where you have to go out and get something for something like a non-playable character. Or maybe there's a defeat so many enemies quest. Maybe you have an escort mission in like a first person shooter. Quests come in different types and forms. And what we're going to do today is kind of dive in and look how we can kind of build our own quests. But before that, let's take a look at some quest systems that and games they're built into. Right. So let's take a look at our first game to kind of show off how quest mechanics work. As you can see in the right side of the screen, it basically lists what our current mission is, which is meet Hanako. This is a good example of basically your mission, and then if you notice, there's a pin in the map that points out where we're supposed to be heading. This is a nice way of tying in-game locations together with your quest. But I want to dive a little bit deeper into the basically how the quest slash job system works in Cyberpunk. Just open the menu, and then in the journal, we can just go in there and we have this section called jobs. And here it'll actually list all the different main jobs and side jobs, gigs, and things like that that are available. If we actually click in one, it'll show us things like location. We can set it to track this job as the current one we want to accomplish, a small blurb. But it doesn't really tell you what the rewards are, but that doesn't mean there aren't rewards tied to the quest. That might just be something that's not shown to the player directly. So this is a good first example of how you can build out some quest mechanics. Let's take a look at our next game. Another good example of a quest system is what we have here in Soul Hackers 2. If you go to the request section, there are all sorts of tasks, missions, and things that you're assigned by different NPCs to take on. So this is just another good example of the kind of thing you can develop when you're actually planning and designing your quest system. See, and then diving a little deeper, we have our details, recommended level, locations, reward. So it just shows that idea of what can be built into a quest system and the actual quest itself. Now that we've taken a look at a few games that incorporate quests and missions into their game structure, let's talk about what quest flow is. And quest flow is basically how you move through the different states of a quest. Usually a quest is given by some kind of character, usually not controlled by the player in a game. And when they assign you the quest, they'll give you details of what you're supposed to do, what you're supposed to accomplish. Once you actually take on that quest, complete the task, or do whatever you need to do for it to be deemed complete, then the player is expected to return to that character or inform that character some way or other, because in Cyberpunk you can call people, and let them know that you've accomplished the quest. At that point, different things can happen depending on how your game's built. You can earn some kind of reward for completing the mission, or maybe it's part of a bigger storyline that will unlock another mission, maybe, or be the final mission as part of a larger thing or the main story of your game and would basically complete or move progress forward. It depends on how you incorporate your quest system into your game, but these are just some of the basic ways and flows of questing. Alright, so let's design a simple-ish quest for, let's say, a role-playing game. Tabletop, digital, it doesn't matter. And basically the goal of our quest will be to help a waitress find her missing cat. So with that said, we now have basically our goal and our NPC started. So we have the first states of our quest set. So now that we know where we're starting, let's take a look at what the flow for this quest would be. Now, let's jump into how we would actually design a quest. Let's start off with our quest NPC. This is the place where most quests begin, usually with some kind of player character. And in this case, we basically have two restaurant owners who are looking for their lost cat. So what this does is, this sets up the who and what for what's your quest going to be about. We know that we have this NPC and they have a task for you. And in this case, it's a fetch quest style of quest. So now the bulk of the quest, which is the actual quest mission, which is to find said cat and basically return it back to its owners. Because this is a fetch quest, there's a certain quantity of something we need to get before we can actually return back to the NPC and complete the quest. And in this case, it's a cat. One cat. Just one. This time. Which then leads us to, well, what do you get for actually completing the quest? And that's where we design our quest rewards. And in this case, it's going to be a box with a fat stack of cash when you find the cat and return it back to its owners. So that basically covers how we can design a very simple, straightforward quest that you can implement into any kind of game, from an RPG to an action game to even a superhero game, because superheroes love finding cats for people. Isn't that right, Mr. Incredible? With that said and done, we now have our quest flow. With that, you can come up with any rewards tied into any other story or missions that you may have in your game, but you now have a simple quest that you can make use of for any other game you're working on, design-wise at least. But how do we actually build a quest from the coding side? Well, that's a very good question. Let's jump into how we can actually build a class meant for handling your quests. Now that we're in code, let's see how we can actually make a class for handling quests. So one thing you may want to take into account is giving it a name. What is this quest? How do we basically separate it from any other quests or missions that a player's accomplish? Besides a name, sometimes you'll even want to add something like a description. So that's another field we could potentially add, but in this case, we're just going to create only a name. Then we're going to want to know who actually gave us this quest. And something like a string to represent who gave the quest helps. But if you have it attached to a specific character or NPC class, you may want to point specifically to that or to a reference of that. Another idea to take into account is, has the player actually completed this quest so far? As you've seen in some UIs, we actually display quests that have been completed. So marking it as true or false makes it easier to sort and handle all those different quests that a player may actually have in their quest logs. Next thing we want to look at is task count. Whatever the task is, there may be a certain count or a certain amount of things that have to be done or gathered to consider the quest done. This will allow us to basically have our max, or what the target goal is and how many of that we need. To follow that up, we may have something like a current count, and this tracks how many of that thing have we already done, gathered, or so on and so forth. And that'll help us basically figure out when the player has hit the completed state and to set that flag true. Now, the next two items are basically things that we deal with when a player actually completes the quest. And we may have something like an item class to represent the reward that a player may earn when they finish a quest. Another thing is that when a player finishes one quest, maybe it unlocks another quest. So we'll actually have a variable that is of the quest type that we may set active or add to the player's log when they finish their current quest. Now, this is just a simple look of how the build a very basic class in terms of the things that'll be in it. You may also want to do something like build out a constructor for setting some of these values when you actually speak to an NPC before adding it to the log. And that's just some of the other things and other functionality we may want to take into consideration when building a quest class. That covers our look at quest mechanics. Hopefully, you were able to learn just a little bit about how quests can be built, how they can be used in your own games, and how they're pretty much the foundation for a lot of games that exist today. With that said, if this interested you or you'd like to see more videos on similar topics, let me know below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.